Hi there, welcome to the next CLD video. In this one, we're going to be looking at yet more stages. We love stages on English Language A level. We've already had, when we looked at CLD speech, we had the structural stages of children's speaking. So what I mean by that is like the pre-verbal stage and the holophrastic stage and the two-word stage. So we've done all of those. That's called the structural model of looking at children speaking. We've had Jean Piaget's cognitive theory, where he groups children's thinking into four different stages, starting with sensory motor and then moving through pre-operational and concrete operational. And in the previous lesson, we looked at Jean Chow and her 6 stages in children's developing reading. So today, what we're going to look at is a thing called emergent writing, and then we're going to have a look at a really tremendous model on this, which is Kroll's stages of writing. Okay, so let's start off with this concept of emergent literacy. Now, once upon a time, people used to think, well, children knew nothing at all about literacy until they were formally instructed at school. And then along came a New Zealander by the name of Marie Clay, who coined this term emergent literacy. Now, by this, she meant reading and writing like behaviour. And it was her view that knowledge about literacy actually precedes formal instruction in schools, that actually children know a heck of a lot about reading and writing before they're formally taught in infants. So she argues that children are highly motivated with literacy. They see adults using it around them all the time, and therefore they can see its importance. And that's why from a very early age, they're very motivated to develop their literacy skills. And so she argues that children acquire literacy from things like the social environment, so posters, and storybooks as well. So things like the syntactical structures that children get to learn, they learn that from their parents reading to them on storybooks. So this is called emergent literacy. Now, on the slideshow, there's a nice short video here with a presentation about it. So it's the idea that before children can write coherent letters or words, they are likely to be in this first stage, this emergent stage of writing. And actually, although what you see on the page may look just like scribbles, the argument goes that actually children are engaged in quite a complicated process here of making signs on the page, so that we should take seriously things that most people would sort of cast away as being quite insignificant. So let's have a look at some examples of children's emergent writing. Here's the first one. Now, this is done by a 2-year-old. Now, obviously, there's no sign of this 2-year-old being able to identify individual graphemes. So they're not articulating individual letters. They're not even demarcating any kind of words. But they do have a certain control over the fine motor skills needed for writing. So look at the delineation, which means putting the words on a particular line. There is a kind of steadiness and control to the delineation. And we have directionality as well. So the child seems to have understood that in English, at least, we go from left to right. And when we look at normal people's writing, it tends to be cursive, joined up writing. And so from a distance, this child is doing a fairly decent rendition of what cursive script actually looks like. We then have a step up from that. So this is a child who is 3 years old, and you can see there's a heck of a difference between this one and the one that we've just looked at. We've got the articulation of all of these different graphemes, and we have such a range of different graphemes here. It's not just a handful of letters that the child seems to be mastering, but we have a whole range. We have consonants and we have vowels. We seem to have a decent combination of them, so that even though this child is not spelling kind of conventional words, the formation of the vowels and the consonants in sequence is kind of understandable. They are mostly uppercase letters that we've got, like the B, for example, and the H, and the I. These are very, very carefully drawn out. So there is a lot of skill and concentration that's gone into producing those letters. Obviously, we have no demarcation of lexical items, meaning, it's not written in individual words. There is no sense of any semantics, any meaning coming through this. So you could call this kind of practicing skills, a bit like John Doerr was talking about in early children's speaking. He said one of the main functions is practice. Well, here seems to be a child who, in this sort of pre-reading, pre-writing kind of emergent writing area, is practicing some basic skills. So there is admirable control that's going on here. And a third one is this one over here. We're not quite at the stage where we can fathom what this child is actually trying to communicate, but the very fact that they've put an image alongside the piece of writing shows that there is probably some kind of meaning that's being produced here. And we do have a step forward in the sense that we have individual words here. So perhaps this first word, perhaps that is is, perhaps that's is. It's difficult to fathom what the rest of the words are, but again, we've got this focus on uppercase rather than lowercase letters. The thing I'd throw in here is that when these children are in the emergent writing stage, writing their first letters, they do tend to be the letters of their own name, right? Because maybe that's what they're trying to communicate most of all. And Jean Piaget would say, of course, well, this is a feature of their egocentricity. So you've got three decent examples there of emergent writing. And I hope I've convinced you that rather than just sort of dismissing these as meaningless scribbles, that you could actually see the kind of germs of proper literacy that will follow it. Okay, we're now going to move into Kroll's 4 stages of writing. As with all of these things, be careful about being too prescriptive about these ages. These are rough approximations. So Barry Kroll comes along and says, well, children generally in the first 5 or 6 years of their life, they are in the preparatory stage. So in this stage, the child is mastering the physical motor skills that are required to write. And from our exercise that we did last lesson when you were writing a bit in Turkish with your other hand, you can see that actually takes a lot of doing. So you have to build up the kind of motor control skills, and that takes quite a lot of time. Then, of course, the child is developing a basic understanding of how phonemes and graphemes link together, and then how they come together in order to produce standard English spelling. So here we have the beginnings of phonics, of course. Remember the differentiation between analytic phonics and synthetic phonics. And writing at this stage, I mean, we're talking about infants in their first years at primary school. Writing, of course, will be heavily scaffolded. So it may well be that the child is asked to fill in blanks in sentences that are pre-supplied. In which case, the importance of the MKO, the more knowledgeable other, is really significant here. It's the adult who, through instruction, is kind of nudging the child through the zone of proximal development. At this stage, Kroll is arguing the preparatory stage, speech and writing are very separate. That obviously, as we know, a 5-year-old child is usually in the post-telegraphic stage here, and so there is a real fluency to their speech, not so on their writing. Here's an example of a piece of preparatory stage writing. I don't know whether you want to have a go at trying to work out what this child is doing. Obviously, it's quite deictical in the sense that you would have to be there alongside the child and maybe asking what the child has written to get any kind of understanding of what it is. But perhaps it says, I went to now I'm not sure about this, it could be party, I don't know. I won a pad of paper, perhaps. Now, you can see the logic behind the lettering here, can't you? That if a child is being asked to phonically sound out individual phonemes and then put the representations down in graphemes, they've done a damn fine job. If we are to say, I won a pad of paper, and incidentally, children's accent features, regional accent features are going to play a part here, aren't they? I won a pad of paper. Well, pad is absolutely perfect, P-A-D. And then of, that preposition of, it makes perfect logical sense to have spelt it EV like that, because when we actually say the preposition of, it's actually a voiced sound. It's a voiced consonant that we put on the end. And then paper as well, paper, it doesn't sound so dissimilar to an A. So you've got, like we were saying here about nativism, where children are like little white-coated scientists who are trying to make the best of the data that's coming into them, then children, we need to credit children with doing the same, that although some of these words are spelt in a non-standard way, there is clearly a kind of rational logic going on behind some of the spelling and the word formation. So we have two very simple sentences. If this was what it is, I went to a party, I won a pad of paper. So two simple sentences. We've got perfect subject, verb, and here adverbial. So it's an adverb of place. So grammatically, that's standard. And we've got decent control and directionality, and we've got lexical demarcation with each of the words being individualized. So for a 5-year-old, that's a pretty impressive piece of writing. Okay, let's move now on to the next stage, which is Kroll is calling the consolidation stage, because in this stage, the child is consolidating some of the basic language skills that they've learned as an early infant. So we're looking here at kind of late infant and early key stage 2. So at this stage, the characteristic of it is that it's basically speech written down. Okay, so at this stage, actually the child is being encouraged to talk about what they're going to write, speak it out loud, and then write it down. So modally, there is, like a closeness between how the child is speaking and what the child is writing. So they are likely to be using, in terms of grammar, short declarative sentences. They may be grammatically incomplete sentences, like minor sentences, or they may well be quite lengthy compound sentences. So phrases or clauses linked together by coordinating connectives, such as and then and so. Because every day when we talk, and especially when we're telling anecdotes, we're telling narrative stories about what's happened to us, this is what we tend to do. Adults in everyday speech, we talk in lengthy compound sentences. So it's no surprise that that's what features there, particularly if we're saying to children, write down exactly what you're saying. Okay, so at this stage, writers, like in the previous stage, they will be encouraged to follow preset structures. Again, the hand of the MKO is going to be quite important here. And we've got punctuation that is just emerging. So we've got the beginnings of an understanding of how to control writing through things like capital letters, full stops, things like commas for lists, and question marks and exclamation marks. Here's a good example of a child writing in the consolidation stage. I'm assuming that this child has written the following: I'm going to Florida and we might go to the beach and I can swim. Now you can see straight away that what we've got there is a lengthy compound sentence where we've got clauses like I'm going to Florida, and then they're connected together by coordinating connected and. So this is very characteristic of speech, and therefore it's characteristic of this consolidation stage. Directionality and linear delineation seems to be pretty much mastered here. We do have some lexical inversion, not lexical, graphemic inversion. So we've got letters which are the wrong way around. So that's a G going, and that's pretty common at this stage, particularly with things like D's and B's, in this case G. We've got decent spelling going all the way through here. We have a conventional spelling there. That's a conventional standard spelling. That's spelt in a standard way. This is near enough to conventional spelling. It's just that we've got a bit of omission of the vowel sound in the middle. And if you look at the last three words, they are spelt absolutely perfectly. So, we have, although these are simple monosyllabic words, these are spelt in a pretty conventional way. And even when they are spelt in a non-standard way, again, you can kind of work out the reasons behind it. So, for example, on the second line here, and we might go, or perhaps this is a child who's beginning to understand about the magic E. This is the E marker, where you put an E at the end of a word that's got a short vowel, and it elongates the previous vowel. So, for example, mad, we put an E on the end and it becomes made, or bit, we put an E on the end, it becomes bite. And so here, might, so, the child is hearing that there is a long vowel here, there's a diphthong sound there, and maybe that's why they're putting an E marker on the end. Okay, so there does seem to be a kind of logic behind some of the spelling, even though some of it's non-standard. Okay, let's move on to the next stage, which is the differentiation stage. So here we're looking mainly at children 8 to 11, so the back end of primary school. Now, it's called the differentiation stage because children at this stage are becoming more aware of the differences between writing and speech. And so that's different from the previous stage, the consolidation stage, where the teachers have actually been encouraging the child just to write down what they say. Here, there is an awareness that actually these two modes have very different functions and very different features. So what we get at this stage is a kind of increasing confidence in handling some of those standard English conventions and those grammatical structures that you would associate with writing. So we start to see complex sentences, for example. So we get subordinate clauses, and we start to get the use of subordinating connectives and relative pronouns. So things like, if it rains, comma, then I'll bring my umbrella. So if it rains there is a conditional subordinate clause. And so we're starting to see that level of complexity rising in children's writing. There's also a greater variety because children at this stage, they're widening their repertoire. So they're being asked to do all sorts of different genres and writing for different purposes. And so they have to understand that if they are writing let's say a newspaper article that's giving a piece of news about what's happened in their park the day before, then it's got to have certain genre features. It's got to have, for example, an arresting, engaging headline. It's going to have a first sentence which tells the reader what's happened to who, when, and where, etc. So, there's each piece of text requires a different set of, genre features, and it's at this stage that children are getting this. Okay, and obviously they're exposed in school to this range of writing styles and genres. Let's have a look at a piece of writing that I think is in this differentiation stage. This is a piece of narrative. It's called The Fish and Snake. So once upon a time, in a sea far, far away, there was a fish and a snake. They were friends. One day they were swimming, and then fish got caught in a net. Then snake bit for 7 hours. Fish was very lucky because the net was almost out of the water and snake made a hole just in time. Moral, keep your eyes open. I'll try and remember that today. Right, so this is quite an interesting little narrative, isn't it? It's quite well controlled. It's simple in the sense that it's moving forward chronologically through time in a basic sequential way, but it's got some of the kind of genre features that you'd expect to find in a piece of genre writing. So it's got quite an intriguing title with a juxtaposition of two different sorts of animals. It starts off with a formulaic collocation, once upon a time, so it's signalling to us, the readers, that we're going to have a story that's being told to us. And it orientates the reader with adverbials of time and place. So in a sea, that's an adverbial of place, and far, far away is an adverbial of time. So it's nailed the sort of conventions that you'd expect to find in a piece of storytelling. It also gives us the orientation about introducing the main characters. It uses the indefinite article a in the kind of standard way because this is the first time that we're being introduced to these characters, so that kind of makes sense. It gives us some detail about these two characters, the fish and the snake. We're told that they were friends. Notice, by the way, the handling of punctuation here. that we've actually got pretty good control over sentencing. We've got full stops ending sentences in definite ways rather than having commas that do kind of comma splicing. We've got capital letters at the beginning of sentences. We've got the spelling of words like swimming done in a conventional way. So there is a rule about this in English that basically when you have two consonants in a row, they tend to come after a short vowel. So the child has got that one. They've doubled the consonant in the medial position of the word there. They've gone two M's. And so that shows some kind of instinctive awareness about spelling. It has some quite basic features still. So some of the elements of this are a little bit like consolidation. So, for example, if we were reading a story, we'd want a little bit more of colour and flavour. We'd expect to see a few more adjectives thrown in so that we can engage a little bit more with these characters of the fish and the snake. But we do have complex sentences, because here it says fish was very lucky because the net was almost out of the water. So there we've got the main clause, fish was very lucky. So that's the main clause. And then we've got a subordinating clause that goes because the net was almost out of the water, because there being a subordinating connective. So we're starting to get a child who's controlling complex sentences. And then at the end, we've got this moral. Presumably the children were set this story to write and they had to tell us what the moral was at the end. So differentiation stage. We now move into the final frontier. So this is Kroll's integration stage, where we're looking really at children who are at secondary school, Key Stage 3 and on into Key Stage 4. At this stage, writers are developing quite a personal voice. They're quite distinctive in the way that they write. And one writer has an individual style that's quite different from other writers. So the child is adapting style confidently to the requirements of genre, audience, and purpose. And it's that adverb confidently that's the important thing here. The previous one, there were some aspects of genre and purpose, but there's a kind of confidence to the integration stage that you don't get in the previous one. So, for example, on narrative and descriptive skills, you've got narratives with developed characters. You've got some interesting plot development. Maybe you've got some kind of subtle evocation of atmosphere through setting. And the other thing, that technical accuracy really controls the writing. So, here is a writer who is likely to be able to use the full armory of things like punctuation. So, for example, possessive apostrophes or semicolons in the right places. And the writer is able to draw upon a wide lexicon, a wide vocabulary to select synonyms with powerful connotations. So if we're looking at a piece of integration stage writing, it might look something like this. He sits in his old dentist chair. The clock weeps. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The tap dribbles with fear as the water runs down it like a river. The sun creeps through the grimy window. Air flows as the dust moves in the ornamentation of the ice-cold draught. The dark wood looks as if snow has fallen over it as dust gathers blanket. Now, that's all I'll read. As you can see, that's very well controlled and it's highly evocative. We've got a cataphoric reference at the beginning here with the third person pronoun that's used. We don't know who he is, so presumably as the narrative unfolds we'll get to find out who this person is, and he's actually a dentist. We've got the use of the present tense used in order to show that this is kind of like a live commentary. This is something that's happening right in front of our very eyes. We've got the personification going on here. So the clock is being described as if it's a human being. And then we've got these onomatopoeic qualities of tick-tock, tick-tock. So these are very individual, interesting elements of language, and we as readers are likely to be hooked. So they're not just mechanically going through some of these genre features, but they're really attentive to some of the nuances of vocabulary and sentencing. The tap dribbles with fear as the water runs down it like a river. Not all of it is totally successful. I would argue that the simile that's used at the end of that sentence is a bit of a mismatch with the idea of dribbling with fear. So, when we're saying the integration stage, we're not saying it's necessarily Charles Dickens that's writing. there are going to be some lapses in register and style, but you can see here the individual nature of the writing control that's coming through. Okay, so what I'd recommend that you do is you read through very carefully from the handbook this article here. It's on page, page 17 and 18, and it's called Speaking, Writing Relationships in the Growth of Writing Abilities. And it's written by Barry Kroll. And it's very good because it talks about, particularly about why he's named those 4 categories in that way. So do that, and then what you want to do is you want to go to your AQA textbook and page 125 and 126, and you've got 4 short texts there. I'm talking about 14J and K, and over the page 14L and 14M, and you want to have a look at them and try and apply Kroll's writing stages. Now, don't do this in a heavy-handed way. Don't necessarily say, oh, well, A is definitely in such and such a stage. Be a bit more tentative about it. Say, well, this text shows some signs of creeping towards Kroll's consolidation stage. Because after all, you've only got a limited amount of data, so I wouldn't be too dogmatic in the statements that you make. So if you were to look at this one here, I don't know whether you can see that, but there is a piece of text there that's on the top of page 126. It's called The Ugly Bug Ball, and a child underneath guest list has had a go at writing the word spider, ant, ladybird, and bumblebee. Okay, so here's an example of how you could write about that applying Kroll's registers. So I'll just make that a little bit smaller. So the child shows evidence of being in Kroll's preparatory stage. Notice the careful way I've expressed that. The text comprises of a simple list of proper nouns, strongly guided by the teacher's scaffolding of a title and accompanying visual images. The graphemes are presented in print handwriting, meaning separate letters, showing some good control of fine motor skills, but some lack of control in linearity. The last 2 nouns are variable in spacing. 2 out of the 4 nouns are spelt in a non-standard way. Notice I'm not saying they're spelt wrong or incorrect, because that would be prescriptive. So I've said spelt in a non-standard way, with omission of the d grapheme in the medial position of spider. Medial just means the middle. And the substitution of an a for the e vowel. The b in the medial position of bumblebee has been omitted, possibly because of the difficulty the children might have in sounding out a consonant cluster. So what you're doing here is you're drawing upon your knowledge of phonological development in children and aligning it to the way that children are spelling. Overall, the child has shown a good understanding of phonemic graphemic correspondence. So there's your example. Now you need to be doing a similar thing with the 3 other examples on page 125 and 126. That's all I'm going to do for today. Thank you very much. And next time, we will move on to other different approaches by teachers towards teaching reading and writing.